Thank you very much. So a couple years ago, I'm stood in the center of a boxing ring at a sold-out Alexander Palace, and I'm nervous. And I am so worried that everybody's going to know what I've just done. And I'm thinking in the back of my head, I've got to cover this up. How am I going to cover this up? I've got to cover this up. We've got several thousand people in the building. We're going live in about 70 different countries. We're on Sky Sports, we're on Eurosport, we're on ESPN in America. It's a big show. And I'm freaking out. And there's so much stuff going on in the back of my head, and I've got to stay focused on the thing that I'm there to do. So I'm looking around, I see the boxers in their ring, in their corners, they're ready to go. I see the referee, I've got to kind of keep an eye on him to make sure he doesn't come in the shot. I see the ring card girls walking, and I got to make sure that they don't come between me and the camera. And so what it feels like for me is I'm stood in the middle of the boxing ring. There's a camera about 1.5 feet from my face. I've got an earpiece in, and there's so much chatter going on, it's ridiculous. I've got all of the channels, so I can hear the production guy saying which cameras are going, so I know where the angle is. I can hear the sound guy talking about the levels, talking about what to do. I can hear the floor manager talking about how everybody's moving. And the way it works is I'm cued in, listening for my name, but in the back of my head, I'm scared to death. Because everybody, I'm thinking in my mind, everybody knows. In reality, they may or may not know, but in my mind, everybody knows. So I hear, ready, Bret? 5, 4, 3, 2, and cue Bret. And I, ladies and gentlemen, very good evening from the Alexander Palace in London, England. And I go ahead and I do my thing. And as soon as I was done, I dropped the mic, I raced out of the ring, I dove through the ropes, and I headed through the crowd, grabbed a full roll of gaffer tape off the sound guy's table, and I headed to the back storeroom because I've got to take care of this thing. As soon as I got into the storeroom, I made sure nobody was looking. I took my trousers off, I turned them inside out, I took a big strip of gaffer tape, and I fixed the seam that had torn when I climbed into the ring on national global television. It was horrible. So what I want to talk about tonight is I want to talk about storytelling. And I want to talk about how you bring an audience in and how you deliver in a business context, in a not so much a stand-up comedy context. We've already got a pro in the house for that. But how do we bring our audience in? And dissecting humor, so I get to sort of be, I guess, the thorn between two roses, because I'm the one that's going to talk about why humor's funny and how we use it. And this is a great quote from E.B. White. And humor can be dissected just like a frog can, but as soon as you cut it open, it gets messy and ugly, and the only people that are really interested in what's going on are the scientists. And I guess I'm don't know whether I'm geek or scientist, but I'm going to talk about what's really going on. And so what I want to do is I want to look at some frogs, and we're going to kill some frogs tonight. And thanks to Anik for her brilliant joke. Did anybody see when she first posted this and she posted her favorite joke? Anybody in the room recognize that? Okay, we'll come back to that. We'll come back to that, don't worry. So I want to talk about how do we set the scene? How do we master the science? And then what's the structure? What is it that makes things funny? Right? Why is Karen's story about cancer, how can she make us giggle at that? Are you kidding? But there's definite structure and definite science going on. So I want to look at each of those things. So first, if we talk about the scene, how do we set the scene for any meeting? Right? How do we set the scene for a business meeting? How do we set the scene for a pitch? Anybody have a corporate pitch job? Yeah, okay. So you get a corporate slide deck that you've got to deliver, right? Has anybody sat in a corporate pitch and watched the corporate slide deck? Right? Okay, so I'm going to pitch to you like corporate, and I've got my slide deck behind me, and I've got that that race car slide that's got all the company logos. So let's pretend we're speed dating, and I say, "Hi, my name's Bret, and I'm really, really good looking, and do you know what? I've slept with a lot of women just like you. See their pictures? And how effective is that? Right? And people just kind of switch off because we're not setting the scene, right? So when I'm talking about what's going on in the alley pally, what's going on in my head, what I want to do is I want to parachute you right into the middle of something, right? Suspend your belief a bit. If I'm in a corporate situation, I want to drop you right in the middle of a case study, for instance. when I integrated Hewlett-Packard and Compaq, let me tell you about this woman that I dealt with who made my life really miserable. Oh, now you're with me, right? And so as we start to set the scene, just bring people right in, right? If you think about your favorite movies, think about your favorite books, think about anything that gets you excited, it's always dropping you right in the middle of a scene, right? Your week-to-week, whatever shows you might watch, they drop you right in the middle of a scene. And so we want to do that with everything we do. Karen dropped us right in the middle of a scene, right? Brilliant, because now we're with her. Now what happened next? What happened next? Let me tell you about when I called my dad. And then my mom was upstairs doing the ironing, earning her keep, right in the middle of a scene. Brilliant. And we're ready to listen. So as we start to set this scene, the next thing that we want to think about is what is actually the science, not only of humor, but the science of storytelling. And why are people interested in what we have to say, right? So, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these because I typically run a whole day. But if we think about our history as humans, right? Some people say we're wired for stories. Some scientists say we have evolved as storytellers. Some scientists say, well, we actually haven't evolved as storytellers, but good storytellers exploit that bit of our brain that hasn't quite evolved. Doesn't really matter which side you look at. But about 1.7 million years ago, we sort of learned how to communicate, right? We learned how to draw cave paintings. We learned how to communicate in pictures. We learned how to build scenes for each other, right? And as we move sort of along the timeline, eventually we learned how to speak about 2,500 years ago. Plato was sat at the feet of Socrates, and Socrates was a storyteller. He was an orator. Plato was a writer, and do you know what Socrates said to him? He said, do you know what? Stop writing that stuff down because it's going to ruin your imagination. Right? And just last week, in some boardroom somewhere, we see people that communicate like this. So here's my talk in an outline, right? And here's just some neurology stuff that I keep track of. And I could talk you through all this. Would you rather I do this? Is this more important? Because, what was that? It is very bright. That's how most slides are. Bright white background with stuff in the middle. And the thing is, excuse me, the thing is what we've done here is we activate a different region of the brain, right? We activate these two regions of the brain called the Broca and Warnix region. And so the science behind that, so what the Broca and Warnix region do is essentially they're kind of responsible for your motor skills, for the way you put language together, the words you choose. But there's no imagination involved. There's no sort of feeling involved. Is that really bright? And as we start to engage those portions of the brain, people just switch off. And they're not really interested, right? How many speakers have you seen that get up and the first 5 minutes of their speech, they spend justifying the reasons why they're on stage in front of you, right? And they want to give their CV. And all of a sudden, when you start to give a CV, guess what? You engage these same regions of the brain. Not only that, but as a speaker, if you spend 5 minutes giving your CV, you've wasted 5 minutes of opportunity to impact your audience. Because when you're the person standing here facing that way, you have the ability to impact everybody in the room all at once. Why would you want to tell them why you're standing in front of them? They know why, or they wouldn't be there in the first place, right? There we go. So on the opposite side of that, what we want to do is we want to engage all of the sensory regions and all the sensory neural networks in people's brains, right? They've done some studies in Spain where they had some people in MRIs. Woo, MRIs. And they watched their neural activity. And they had them read words like chair and door, and they watched the regions of the brains light up. And then they had them read other words like perfume and coffee and orange juice. And guess what? Different areas of the brains lit up because they were engaging different networks entirely, and they weren't the Brock and the Warwick's area. The thing that Karen did when she talked about her friend on the beach and how she was over the balcony, right? How many of you were right there with her? Go on. One, thank you, sir. When I talk to you about standing in the center of a boxing ring in a sold-out alley pally with cameras getting ready to go live all over the world, how many of you are nervous with me, right? So this is called neural coupling. So what happens is as we start to tell stories to people, if we're engaging those other areas of the brain, then we can light up the same neural networks in our audience that were lit up in us when we actually experienced it. You might want to not go too far on this, Karen. over your balcony. So what happens is the speaker is delivering a story. The speaker is recalling something. The speaker is giving as much vivid detail as you can. Let me tell you what it sounded like. Let me tell you about the ring card girls. Let me tell you about all the noise that was going in my ear. Let me tell you how nervous I felt. Let me tell you what I saw. So what I've done is first of all, I've engaged all of the different types of people in the room. Because I said, let me tell you what I saw. So anybody who's visually orientated, you're with me, right? Let me tell you what it sounded like, what was going on in my ears. Now anybody who's auditorily organized, you're with me, right? And let me tell you how nervous I felt. Now all the kinesthetic people are with me as well, right? So I've not left anybody behind, and I've brought you all with me. And then what I've done is I've lit up the same stuff in your brain that's going on in my brain. Karen lit up the same stuff in your brain that was going on in her brain. And when we do that with a humorous intent, then it's amazing. And the more that we do that, and the more people that catch on, it's just kind of wildfire. You come here already, and you're already pre-framed because you're coming to a comedy night, right? Surprise, I'm here. So you come to a comedy night and you're ready to laugh. And the person next to you laughs and you get a giggle. And then the person next to them laughs. And then before you know it, the whole room's laughing, right? Because we're primed, and as we start to couple up neurologically, then all of a sudden we're experiencing the same thing all together. So when we layer on top of neural coupling the chemicals and things that are swirling around in our brains, right? So there's good chemicals and there's bad chemicals. There's a good mix and there's a bad mix. And so these three, dopamine, oxytocin, and endorphins, are the good things, right? These are the things that we want swirling around in our audience's brains. Dopamine is that thing that makes you want to come along with me on the story. So you're wondering what it was that I had done that I knew everybody was going to know about, right? And so what dopamine does is it motivates your audience, it gets them focused on your story, and it helps them to retain the information. When you're delivering dopamine in a humorous context, it helps people learn. And the more that people retain, the more that they learn about what you're talking about. If you tell a funny joke, people remember the joke. If you tell a funny story, people remember you. Because it's your story, it's very different, right? Oxytocin, how many people saw from the stage here? A couple, right? So oxytocin is your friend because this they call it the cuddle chemical, right? This is the thing. If I was to tell you a sad story, or if I was to tell you Karen's set was quite oxytocin-inducing, because we could go along with her on her sort of her trials as she went through it, what it was like on the MRI, what it was like when she talked about the music and how that made her feel, and then all of a sudden we're feeling a bit empathetic. And when you start to feel, when oxytocin starts coursing through your veins, then you kind of start to get generous. You start to be all these things. And then finally, endorphins, and that's the payoff with the laugh. Right? Endorphins make you happy. Endorphins make you relaxed. Endorphins make you more creative. Right? Tom, your whole thing is about making people creative and getting the endorphins rushing around. With humor, with music, with everything. And then people get excited. And then all of a sudden they get creative. And then let's get the marketing department to go do something, build something magical, right? Now the thing is, there's also the wrong mix. And so these are known as the stress chemicals, right? Cortisol even makes you fat, right? Ridiculous because it gathers here, right? Adrenaline. And these chemicals make you all these things: irritable, stressed, impaired, critical. And do you know how you make these chemicals come out in your people's brains? Ah! Sorry. How you feeling? Stressed, irritable, impaired, angry. Do you know how else you can make these chemicals come out in your listeners' brains? Just like that. And do you know how else? Give them your CV. Why would you want to leave your audience with that? Why would you want your audience to remember that? And as they walk out, think, God, that kind of stressed me out. That was boring. I really didn't really retain much, right? And then finally, we'll get to the structure. And so there's a number of different theories about the structure of humor. There's kind of three main ones, really. The things that are funny are when somebody's elevating themselves above somebody else, so they're putting somebody down. There's pent-up sort of sexual frustration or aggression. Sometimes that's funny. And then there's kind of incongruencies, things that just don't match, and that's the one that I kind of want to talk about. So when we take a situation, and that situation has two parts, really. It's typically a social, normal thing, right? Standing in front of a boxing ring. For me, that's kind of a typically normal social thing. You've seen that on television. It's a socially normal thing. My subjective experience, here's what's going on, here's what I see, here's everything. You may be watching it from afar. You see somebody there in a bow tie, and then they're getting, and that's your subjective experience. But what makes it funny is all of a sudden when these things clash and there's a violation in the middle. I rip my trousers on national television. That makes it funny, right? The social norm, not much funny about, two young girls that are a bit hungover and on the beach in Thailand, right? But take one back to the bedroom, throw her in a room with a sick bucket, and then go out and have sex on the balcony. That's funny. There's a violation there, right? So as we, in more ways than one, right? Yeah. And then take that a step further. Okay, that might even still be a bit of a social norm, but then he throws some cash down at the end. That's a violation. It makes it even more funny. So as we start to think about the stories we tell in business, we start to think about the things that we are talking about from the stage, whether we're growing our own business, whether we're working on our signature talks, whatever. It's those violations that make things funny. And if you think about any joke you've ever heard in your life, it's the violations that make things funny, right? 3 dogs sitting in a veterinary's office, and dog in the middle looks to the dog on his right, and he says, "What are you here for?" The dog says, "Well, I'll tell you, my owners, we live in this flat, and they come home every day at 5 o'clock, and what I do is my owner takes me outside, I go for a wee, they bring me back up, I curl up on the carpet, we watch telly, and I go to sleep. I've got such a great life." He says, "Oh." He says, "Well, that's great, but why are you here?" He says, one day it was 5 o'clock, they didn't come home, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock. Pretty soon it was 9:30 and they weren't home. I had my legs crossed, but I had to go. So I weed all over the carpet. And apparently this carpet's from somewhere called Persia or something. It's really expensive, and they got really angry, so they brought me here to put me to sleep. Dog in the middle says, "Oh, it's rough that is." He looks... Thank you. He looks to the dog on the other side. He says, "What are you here for?" He says, "Well, it's kind of the same thing, you see." He says, "My owner, he's about 35 years old. He's got this job. We also live in a flat, it's a big high-rise, fancy thing. And he got this new car, and it's bright red, and it's something called a Ferrari, and the top comes down. And he took me for a ride in it one day, and we were going for this ride, and my ears are flapping in the wind, and it was amazing, and I got so excited, and I weed on the seats. And he likes the car more than me, so he's having me put to sleep." Dog in the middle says, "Rough." Right. Then the first dog says, "What are you here for?" He says, "I got a story." He says, "I also live in a flat." He says, "And my owner is this 20-something beautiful woman. She's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I know she's a human and I'm a dog, but she's beautiful. And she comes home every day, she takes off all her clothes, and she cleans the house naked. And I have to watch this day in and day out and day in and day out. And like I said, I know she's a human and I'm a dog, but one day I jumped on and I just went for the ride of my life." He says, "Oh, so she's having you put to sleep?" He says, "Nope, just get my nails clipped." Violation. Who heard Anik's joke? Who read Anik's joke about coming here? Right, okay. So, very quickly, Anik's joke, there was a very self-assured, confident princess walking through the woods one day, and she sees a frog. And the frog looks at her and he says, look, I'm a handsome prince. I've got a huge castle. Give me a kiss. I'll turn back into a prince. And when I do, you can move in, you can cook my meals, you can take care of me, you can do all my cleaning, all my laundry, and everything will be great. Later that night, as the princess is sitting dining on frog's legs, what did she say, Anik? She said, I don't fucking think so. And I think I found our princess. Again, there's the violation, because we expect everybody to live happily ever after. So I'm just going to leave you with this. As you're thinking about preparing your talks, as you're thinking about whether it's signature talk, whether it's business proposition, whether it's delivering something for whatever corporation you happen to work for, make humor work for you. And think about where you can put humor in. Think about all the things that we've talked about, how to bring people in. And remember, always, when you're standing here facing that way, you have an opportunity to affect every single person in the room. Thank you.